The squeal of tortured metal made Jumpy's teeth curl. It sounded like the noise a ghost would make. No matter how many times he heard it, he never got used to it. Every time, it put him on edge. It didn't help that there was a girl nearby who looked far more like a ghost than a living human should. It was Clover. She sat on the edge of the bed, her head drooping listlessly onto her chest. Her eyes were blank and stared across the room at nothing. Her breathing was slow and mechanical. Aside from the rise and fall of her chest, she didn't move. Jumpy felt as if even a nudge might cause her to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Snake was probably murdered. Chances are he was killed the same way the ninth man was. Seven lowered his voice, likely in an effort to keep Clover from hearing what he had to say. There were 4 other people in the room with Jumpy and Seven. Ace, Santa, June, and Lotus. Seven looked at each one of them in turn and continued. It's pretty straightforward. Not that hard to figure out how they did it. First, the killers got Snake to authenticate on the red to open door 3. Then they shoved him into it, alone, and waited 9 seconds for the door to shut. Once that door shut, it was over for Snake, but he didn't give up. He probably knew it wouldn't do him any good, but he probably ran into the shower room, looking for the dead. It was a small chance, but it wasn't like he had anything to lose. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The detonators only deactivated if everybody who authenticated when they went in uses the dead. And then, 81 seconds after he was shoved in, that happened. I see. So that's what you meant by killers, huh? You need at least 3 people to open one of the numbered doors, including Snake. It wouldn't open for Snake and a single killer. Exactly. That means we're looking at multiple perps here. Jumpy crossed his arms and grunted. Well, just in case, I wanna make sure. Let's say you're right. When do you think Snake was killed? When we all split up to look for the parts for the rats, I think. Right after that was when we noticed he was gone. Then that means none of us have alibis. We were all off searching the rooms we'd been assigned, looking for those parts. Yeah. That means anybody could be a killer.
Wait a minute. What are you talking about?
June seemed shocked.
How can you say one of us is a killer so casually?
Well, not just one of us. If I'm right, then at least 2 of us are murderers. Why don't you calm down a bit, Seven? What are you going to gain by being so suspicious? That's what Zero wants, you know. What Zero wants? Exactly. This game was set up by Zero, wasn't it? Any game has a winner and loser. Whoever makes it through door 9 is a winner, and those who don't are the losers. Zero's trying to make us fight against one another for that victory.
Then you're saying that Zero is trying to split us up by making us fight each other?
Yes. That is why we can't let ourselves fall prey to a suspicion. We have to trust one another and form a strong bond of friendship. Otherwise, we'll end up ensnared by Zero's manipulations.
Then does it mean that the person who killed Snake...
Yes. Almost certainly Zero himself. If there's anyone we should doubt, it should be Zero. He masterminded this game and kidnapped all of us. Doesn't it seem reasonable that he would have killed Snake as well? Jumpy hadn't really considered that. If Zero had killed Snake, then Zero was on the ship with them. Was Zero still on the ship with them? Tja. Kann das sein, dass Zero hier mit uns auf dem Schiff ist und sich irgendwie einen Ast ablacht und nebenbei mal eben so Snake getötet hat? Unter Umständen? Naja, sicher sein können wir nicht, aber, ich weiß nicht, sag einfach mal, wir sind nicht sicher.
He wasn't sure.
Hey, I'm just wondering about one thing. And what's that? How can you be so sure that Zero's on this ship? Ace's eyebrows shot up. Really, Jumpy? I confess, I'm a little disappointed. Usually you're rather sharp. Isn't it obvious? Obvious? How so? This ship. Huh? Zero said this ship several times when he addressed us.
I'm Zero, the captain of this ship. The purpose of the game is simple. Leave the ship alive. As you have no doubt surmised, this ship has begun to sink.
If he weren't here, he wouldn't say this ship, would he? He'd be saying something like that ship or the ship. Oh. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Ja, wie man es nimmt. Er könnte es so oder so, er könnte es für die Teilnehmer des Spiels mehr oder weniger so formuliert haben, ne? Also so hundertprozentig, naja, okay. Ace's explanation made perfect sense. Wie man es halt nimmt. Jumpy felt a little foolish that he didn't see it himself. Still, he was left with a question, and it was one of no small importance. If Zero's on the ship, where is he? Suddenly, everyone went very quiet. The silence was cold and clammy, and Jumpy could feel it crawling across his back and around his throat. Again, he heard the ghosting moaning noise. And moments later, a person who looked more ghost than human appeared. It was Clover. She looked at the floor as she spoke, and her voice was a cold monotone.
I think Zero is one of us.
Every human body in the room froze. The only sound was a muffled rustling of breath. Eyes darted from face to face. One of those faces was the face of their jailer. But who? Jumpy said... well, that's possible, that's crazy. Wir wollen jetzt mal nicht hier für Panik sorgen oder so, ne? Deswegen sagen wir einfach mal, das ist, verrückt. That's crazy. Isn't the ship going to sink in a few hours? If Zero was here with us, he'd be putting himself in danger. Why the hell would he do something like that? There's no motive. Motive. Clover looked up at Jumpy and her face fell.
You don't believe me.
Her eyes were so pitiful. The moment Jumpy met them, he felt his heart tighten. He didn't think what he said was wrong, but perhaps the way he'd said it had been. He'd been too insensitive. Clover had just lost her brother. His death would have been bad enough, but she'd also seen the blasted wreck of his body. Jumpy barely knew him, and the sight had been enough to make him sick. What Clover had felt, he couldn't begin to imagine. In the mental stage she must have been in, it was understandable that she would look at those around her with suspicion. She felt everyone was against her. The least Jumpy could have done was try to understand what she was feeling. He felt ashamed of what he'd said. Perhaps he thought, I should apologize. But before that apology could begin... Clover, I understand what you're feeling. You don't feel that you can trust any of us. Ace had beaten Jumpy to the punch. As he spoke to Clover, his face was calm and friendly. But you have to understand, the more we distrust one another, the further we fall into our true foe's trap. Zero was the one who did those horrible things to your brother. Do you want to let yourself be manipulated by someone who would do such a horrible thing? Clover didn't answer. She didn't even look at Ace. The whole time, her eyes were on Jumpy. He could feel Clover's eyes boring into him. They were the color of a deep winter lake. Jumpy saw no suspicion in them, only sadness. Then, in that horrible silence, they heard a bell begin to ring. It was a clock at the central staircase. 3 in the morning.
That means we have 3 hours left.
Then we need to move, now. 7, Clover. I know how you feel, but you do understand that right now it's important we trust one another, don't you? 7 and Clover remained silent. Their eyes were looking at something somewhere else, very far away. We must go. We have very little time left. Ace's words put their feet to moving. They all knew where they were going. Their next destination was Mercury. Stimmt. Hatten wir noch nicht angesehen. It said, bolted to the wall near the stairs that led to the casino and the kitchen between the 2 elevators. The Mercury card reader. Jumpy stood in front of it with the Mercury keycard. 7 had given him the card. I found it when we were checking out the shower room. At least that's what he'd said. Jumpy slid the card through the reader. The light on the reader turned green and made a tiny electronic noise. Now they were ready. Jumpy and June had been chosen as the investigators. The reasoning being that they had been to E-Deck before and no one else had. As before, Jumpy sent the elevator ahead to make sure the floor they were heading to wasn't flooded. As before, the elevator returned as dry as when it had left. Und niemand muss feucht werden. Once it had been checked for water, Jumpy and June stepped into the elevator. There were only 2 floor buttons that they could push. The C and bottom buttons. The rest were destroyed or did nothing when pushed. Jumpy hit the bottom button. The door closed. Slowly, they began to move downward. Sometime later, Jumpy and June stepped off the elevator and onto the bottom deck. They stepped off and saw that the hallway to the right ended somewhere between 20 and 25 feet from them. The hallway in front of them was a dead end. But not a regular dead end.
This is a numbered door.
This is the 8th one we found. There were 2 numbered doors on B deck near the central staircase. They were doors 4 and 5. There were 3 numbered doors in the large hospital room, doors 3, 7 and 8. Jumpy and June had found another door on E deck and Lotus and Santa had found a 7th on A deck. There was a 6th on the door on E deck and a 1 on the door on A deck. 4, 5, 3, 7, 8, 6, 1. And now door 2 stood in front of Jumpy. There was only one thing it meant.
Do you think the next door we find.
Yeah, I think so. The next one's gonna be in door 9. Despite himself, Jumpy felt excited. There was something about that excitement that frightened him as well. He did his best to put it from his mind and headed back to C-Deck with June.